Parks-Papadopoulos, and she is a former chef turned certified life coach. So I'm going to turn it over to Jasmine, and our interpreter is back.
All of my information with you in the chat so that you have it. But a little bit about who I am and why I'm here today. I am the growth officer for CHOW, which is a nonprofit that supports food, beverage, hospitality workers. And that is particularly important to me personally because I am a third generation chef. I was in the industry for 15 years before I joined CHOW. And so CHOW is a nonprofit that is particularly close to my heart because it's based on shared lived experience for me. I'm going to start screen sharing on my presentation and give a moment. And Carla, I've been told that I speak way too fast, so please let me know if there's any pausing points or slowing down points for you as well. It's my first time using a real-time interpreter, and I'm super stoked, and I hope that I do okay. Okay. Can everybody see me okay? Is my tech working all right?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Okay, so thank you for having me here today. I am very excited to be able to speak to you about the work that Chow is doing and to talk to you a little bit about issues affecting workplace wellness, specifically in the food, beverage, hospitality industry as we see them in our community. So, our mission is to support wellness within the food, beverage, hospitality industry and to improve the lives of our community through shared stories, skills, and resources. What that means to us is that we start off by evaluating a lot of the systemic challenges that we have seen in the food, beverage, hospitality industry through shared experiences, through the voice of our community, through a lot of collated statistics, and we are able to see the challenges so that we can develop healthful programming, community care models, and launches through CHOW that will support food, beverage, hospitality workers. So, first and foremost, one of the most important questions that we ask is who is in the hospitality industry? How do we define the food, beverage, hospitality industry? So I use the term food, beverage, hospitality very intentionally. It's an intentional choice to use the longest term possible because I believe that that term and Chow believes that that term delineates inclusivity. So what we mean when we say food, beverage, hospitality, what we mean is culinary students. We mean folks who are working on food trucks. We mean the truck drivers who are doing long haul truck driving of food supplies. We mean folks who are working in farms and in farmers markets. We mean folks who are stocking the grocery shelves, as well as the very traditional definition that extends to a restaurant or a hotel or a coffee shop, a bar. And so we want to recognize that these fields, specifically the ones at the intersection of human services and food services, are often grouped together and experienced a lot of vocationally specific challenges. And so we want to be very clear in the fact that our community is very inclusive. The services that we offer are available even to industry veterans. That's an important one as well. I haven't been in the industry myself for about 4 years, and I have met a lot of industry vets at CHOW meetings and through CHOW programming. And it is so important and impactful to be able to unpack a lot of the experiences that we have lived through in the industry with appropriate support and resources on the other end. So here's another relevance point of why we delineate the food, beverage, hospitality industry. We know that it is growing incredibly fast. The food, beverage, hospitality industry is growing incredibly fast. And that's not just what we refer to as career food, beverage, hospitality workers, but even, students who are working part-time or folks who are taking a couple of hours as gig workers here and there. We want to recognize that this field is growing because of the incredibly high demand and because of how large it is growing so quickly. And here's a number that we know. We currently know that we are growing at such a pace that we are outpacing mental health environments. So that if every clinical mental health care provider who is licensed were to fill up their docket completely with only food, beverage, hospitality workers, when you consider just how broad this definition is, we actually outnumber them 29 times over. And so CHOW, our tagline is CHOW is us helping us. CHOW was born out of a need to create systems of support to kind of bolster those blind spots that we see in services. And that is not to say that CHOW is a substitution for um, being able to be seen by a mental health care provider. It is not meant to substitute therapy. What it does is it creates an inclusive community of folks who get it, where we work through a trauma-informed lens of peer support, and we are able to create support groups and discussion groups where you have the next soft spot to land until you can go and see your therapist or until you are connected to the next right resource to offer you support. And so this is why CHOW was created 6 years ago. It started off as a very small nonprofit out of Denver, Colorado, and all of our programming is accessible online through a hybrid model. And so our nonprofit has grown exponentially, and the resources and programs that we offer and have offered in the last 5 years have also grown to meet the demand of our industry. So we start off with an overview of the contributing factors to poor mental health in the food, beverage, hospitality industry. And here's what we have heard in our community. It is incredibly challenging to have a business model that does not encapsulate a scarcity mindset, which is that there is a belief, a governing belief that there will never be enough in our industry. We have folks who are trained to look at food costs, who are trained to look at the effectiveness of teams as to how they relate to a financial budget that is often very stringent. And so what typically ends up happening is that even if you fill up a dining room, for one service and you have no empty tables and you are slammed, that doesn't necessarily guarantee long-term success for a business, right? And so these ideas, especially for folks who may come in with pre-existing mental health conditions, that scarcity mindset and that idea that no matter how much we work, that carrot will continue moving forward for us to chase it, it can be incredibly damaging. It's a stressful way to work. On top of that, we have a long-standing history of stigmatized conversations. We want to recognize that there are so many improvements that we have seen in the last years. There's so many resources increasing, and there's so many systems of support, grassroots and large scale, that are being created to support food, beverage, hospitality workers. But we're fairly new to these conversations. A few years ago, we were not talking about the incredibly high suicide rates or about our rates of substance misuse. These were just conversations that folks shied away from. What tends to happen when we have stigmatized conversations is that there isn't in a system of education where folks know what the consequence is for speaking out about something. And so for a very long time, folks didn't speak up or speak out because they didn't know what the punishment would be. And that's to say that what we've heard from folks is that there's definitely, and I can speak from personal experience, I've experienced and have been a part of dispelling a very punitive approach for folks who have come forward to say that they were struggling. When I was in the food, beverage, hospitality industry myself as an executive chef, I can absolutely say that I did not have the resources available to me or the education, and quite frankly, the backbone to be able to stand up for a lot of my team members who were struggling and who were sharing with me that they were struggling. That just wasn't something that we did. We didn't have the conversations, and we didn't know where to direct folks that were struggling. In fact, the punitive approach that I was talking about is that often it would be, okay, we'll take a couple of days off, or I'll take your shifts away from you, so that you don't have to come into work. And that can create a lack of psychological safety. It can be perceived as punishment, and it can even be used as retaliation and punishment. On top of that, we know that there's a high employment turnover. A lot of what we hear post-pandemic from folks is that it is incredibly challenging to get folks through the door. But what used to be true even before the pandemic is that a person can leave a job in the food, beverage, hospitality industry in the morning, and by the afternoon have filled out a couple of applications at another restaurant and can have another job somewhere else. And so this system of having a high employment turnover and a lack of long-term investment, both in employees from the employer side and an employee's side towards a business, typically doesn't leave a lot of room for accountability or growth or ownership or even business development and professional development. And finally, again, another nod to the strong focus on the bottom line. So typically, hospitality is very focused on food cost. We watch our waste, we watch our labor compulsively to make sure that every small number that belongs to the formulaic equation is very adequately tuned down so that we can maximize on profits. And it's very hard to maintain an understanding of how that works while at the same time focusing on the sustainability of teams, right? So when we're looking at numbers and we are crunching numbers, it can become really challenging to remember that behind those numbers are human beings who, need more shifts or who have considerations like going to their AA home group on Monday, or who come in with their own trauma and pre-existing conditions. And often that focus on the bottom line comes with periods of heightened workload, right? The food, beverage, hospitality industry is filled with seasonal work. There are busier periods, and there are periods in which it's a lot slower to work. And so we know that it can be incredibly challenging to maintain kind of an aspect of predictability and neutrality in professional lives of food, beverage, hospitality workers. We also want to acknowledge that there are contributing factors to poor mental health for food, beverage, hospitality workers that extend to the pre-existing or co-occurring mental health conditions that folks come into the industry with. So one of the questions that we ask in our education is, what are folks coming into work with besides their knife roll and their apron and the things that they need for their job? What are they walking in with? Right? What trauma, what experience, what are they coming in with? And they are being met with, let's be honest, pretty high levels of stress with little incentive for self-care. And what does that mean to us? For me personally, I can tell you that when I left the food, beverage, hospitality industry, it was the best that my career had ever been. I was very successful, largely because I am a person who was diagnosed with high functioning anxiety as an adult. And how that presented for me was that I was anxious and afraid all the time. And it meant that I clocked in ahead of everybody. And when everybody clocked out at night, I stayed on a little bit later to make sure that everything was done. And so I presented as a person who was always very prepared, who kept our accounts for everything, who kept a very close eye of consideration on both our bottom line and to make sure that service was on time and to make sure that I was remembering everything. And then when I would clock out in the evening and go home, typically what I found was that it was impossible for me to fall asleep. That I needed a drink or two to be able to decompress after work, and that I was becoming more isolated and marginalized in my own personal life because it was incredibly challenging for me to reintegrate. And there was really no incentive for self-care in that period, because what that would have meant is I need to do a little bit less well at work so that I can take some personal time to take care of myself and make sure that I am investing time in my interests. Well, spoiler alert, at the time I didn't have any outside of the industry. I was working very long hours, and I didn't have a lot of time for my personhood left over. So when I left the industry, there wasn't a lot of Jasmin that was not already embroiled in Jasmin as a chef. I didn't have very healthful relationships outside of the trauma bonds with the folks that I worked with. I did not have a lot of hobbies that I had been spending time on. My relationship with my kids had largely been compromised because even when I was home, I wasn't a very present parent, as was my relationship with my partner that had to be, reestablished and solidified outside of that as I lost my sense of identity. Additionally, in the food, beverage, hospitality industry, there's a lack of awareness about existing resources. One of the most wonderful parts of my job is being able to introduce CHOW to folks who say, I wish I had known about this when I was in the industry, because that is absolutely true for me as well. I did know about CHOW in some capacity when I was in the industry, but I was not able to fully use it as a resource. And a lot of the work that I do and a lot of the folks at CHOW do now is to be able to reach as many people as possible so that they know that this free resource exists. Folks, what we believe is that trauma informed education about resources and policies and programs protects everyone. We believe that when staff and people are trained in understanding what is available to them, they're better equipped to recognize red flags, to set boundaries, to intervene safely, and to even get folks directed or take themselves to the next right place. We also have a strong culture of resilience, which may result in burnout. We've seen a lot of this through the pandemic, and I'm willing to bet you have as well. There were so much of the social media viral content that went viral during the pandemic was folks being yelled at for patrons refusing to wear masks when entering an establishment, right? Who has seen one of those videos? It's so strange to evaluate years later that on the end of so many viral and damaging interactions was a service worker who was not being compensated with any kind of danger pay to show up during the pandemic. We were deemed in many fields essential workers, but were not compensated as essential workers and often had to put up with a pretty high level of verbal abuse from folks who were not willing to adhere to mask policies that were going around at the time. And so, we have this idea that we can keep going, we can keep going. We're just going to get through this Christmas rush and we're just going to get through the pandemic. And typically, what ends up happening is that there's a slow lull in business that then picks up again. And we know that those paces and living outside of values and being put in such high pressure situations with blurred boundaries can result in burnout. Folks often experience compassion fatigue. We see this happening in a lot of industry adjacent fields, like, for example, in the healthcare profession. It wasn't until recently that folks started to think about how all of the hospitals that were staffed during COVID were absolutely staffed with medical staff who were taking care of folks. And at the same time, they had food service workers who were making sure that everything was running and that folks were being fed and that the hospital's infrastructure was up and running. And there has been very little cultural acknowledgement for the fact that food service workers were a very big part of keeping healthcare, the lights on in so many hospitals. And that can extend to compassion fatigue. We have had incredibly intense shares in our community about how challenging it was to be able to cook folks last meals as they experienced hospitalization during COVID. It can be really hard to belong to an industry that holds up an entire infrastructure that extends from memory making to just nourishment, and to know that there is very little acknowledgement coming. Up until recently, there was an incredibly and atypical low representation in media. And so For those of us that can name a sitcom centered around an office environment that can delineate a little bit of what 9 to 5 looks like, up until recently, there wasn't a lot that was showing us what it could look like to work in the food, beverage, hospitality industry. And for the folks in the room that believe that if you can see it, you can be it, I would ask, when we did start to become a little bit more visible in media culture, what are the examples that you can think of for food, beverage, hospitality workers? A lot of what we hear is the things that were visible were largely the damaging stereotypes, right? For those of you that can recall, perhaps Gordon Ramsay and a lot of what we can call his verbal abuse, and a lot of what was being depicted in cooking shows was a fast-paced environment. Um, that did not yield a lot of workplace safety, right? High stress, long hours, unpredictable schedules, unpredictable management, a lot of verbal abuse. And so we know that unchecked mental strain can absolutely lead to an environment where burnout behaviors are more likely to go unnoticed. And so we've had incredibly high rates of suicide and substance misuse. And I believe personally that a lot of that can be traced to not having healthful examples to look towards to create a culture of inspiration for what the food, beverage, hospitality can look like. And then we have levels of stress that lead to substance misuse in our industry. There is a chef whose name is Greg Baker, who wrote an incredible article about what he calls the quiet hour. And he talks about how folks who typically work in a restaurant will get off of work around 11 o'clock, midnight, 1 a.m., depending on when your kitchen closes down, and their partners are asleep. Their friends are asleep. Everyone they know in the world is on an opposing schedule. And so the only place that's open is the dive bar around the corner where they can go and they can enjoy a drink. And what we know on top of that is that a lot of independently owned businesses are still offering a shift drink to folks to incentivize them to kind of to couple a shift drink with what is largely known as a low hourly rate for food, beverage, hospitality workers. So in a lot of places, you're still being incentivized to hang out at your workplace for an hour or two after your shift is drunk, so that after your shift is done, so that you can have a couple of drinks. And what Greg Baker talks about is that even if that is not available to you, typically the only places that are open when restaurants and bars close down is a bar where you can go hang out at. And it's kind of a built-in aspect of your routine that in order to come off of that incredible stress and dysregulation that folks face during a dinner service, you need a couple of drinks to come off it. And so how do we offer support to those folks that live in isolation, marginalization, even just because their work hours are atypical? And as we are talking about, I know that there are mental health professionals in the room. As we are talking about this, the consideration as well of the schedules that most food, beverage, hospitality industry workers are working, that's outside of typical business hours. And so, what I knew to be true about myself when I was in the industry is that it was sometimes even hard just to be seen by a dentist because I worked during those hours. So, imagine if the only support that you had available to you was a therapist who only works in the times that you are at work. It can be so hard, even if we know about the resources, to access the resources, to have funds for the resources, and to know how to be able to set up a system of self-care where Monday, Jasmin is indulging in behaviors or setting up behaviors that are going to support Thursday's version of Jasmin. And so this is what we see and what we have seen about the food, beverage, hospitality industry, coupled with the understanding that, and this information was gathered before the pandemic, we rated number one in substance misuse out of any professional industry. This was pre-pandemic. We can make a largely educated guess that this number probably has not improved post-pandemic. We know that even pop culture tells us that a lot of folks who were able to stop working during the pandemic and who received unemployment often were not moved to return to work because of the money that they were making in the food, beverage, hospitality industry was not commensurate to the amount of hardship that they were experiencing. There have been a lot of vocal content creators and a lot of articles written about what the food, beverage, hospitality industry looks like post-pandemic and why it is so hard to return to it. And so we ask questions at CHOW that are going to be focused on how can we interpret the challenges that we've seen in order to develop systems for the future. And so we ask questions like this is an important consideration as we're considering workplace wellness in the food, beverage, hospitality industry with a lens of sexual assault awareness and prevention. How does it show up in the food, beverage, hospitality industry? Well, we know that more sexual harassment claims in the US are filed in the restaurant industry than in any other. And we want to recognize that power differentials contribute to rates of reporting, right? There is a strong culture of hierarchy in the food, beverage, hospitality industry. For those of you that don't know, the back of the house of a restaurant is built off of the military brigade system. There is meant to be a chef at the top, and there is a line of responsibility that is very closely followed. And so, what I can tell you from personal experience is that where, sorry, folks, somebody has their microphone on and it brought a little bit of Okay, we're good. Sorry about that. What I can tell you from personal experience is that often when there's a lack of mental health support, and what typically happens is that you only have one person who is on top of you in terms of management, that lack of mental health support can create a culture of silencing survivors, right? I speak from personal experience when I tell you that what I observed is that workers who are already in their personal lives coping with anxiety or depression or trauma are a lot less likely to report sexual assault and harassment, especially if there's a fear of retaliation because of power differentials. As a woman working in a male-dominated field, there was a lot that I did not understand about how sexual harassment showed up specifically in our industry. In fact, my very first years at CHOW were spent trying to unpack how much of my experience was sexual harassment with my male peers and counterparts, and how much of it was just normal kitchen behavior, which I would totally be able to handle if I was a man in that environment. And that's just my experience. What we know is that power differentials in any kind of situation are incredibly hard to unpack, and they contribute to systemic challenges in reporting. Obviously, we talked about the high turnover rates, right? If I know that most businesses that operate on an independent scale have no HR departments, and so there's no systems of checks and balances, right? Often, folks are not even doing background checks to make sure because they're so understaffed. Some folks have reported to us that they're just too behind to do background checks, and so we want to recognize that if there's no system of accountability, it is very hard for damaging information to, or even relevant information about the way you operate at work to follow you from workplace to workplace. On top of that, there's the belief that the customer is always right. I spent a very short time at the very beginning of my career working front of the house and being a server. But I can tell you that I have a lot of friends in the food, beverage, hospitality industry still who also experience an incredibly hard time being able to trace the line between what is workplace sexual harassment and what are things that I absolutely have to put up with so that I can get a good tip from this table. And so these types of interactions require a complete shift in culture so that we can create the understanding that that sexual harassment and sexual assault are more likely in settings where there are not clear delineations of what is going to be tolerated and what is not going to be tolerated by a business. And then on top of that, as a final bullet, is the lack of education and training centered around sexual harassment or abuse. I can tell you for myself that I did not have a name for a lot of the experiences that I attributed to being a part of a boys' club. And so if I couldn't even name those behaviors, there was no way that I was going to seek out resources or even know that there was trauma inside of myself to unpack and to receive support for. And so often, if a business does not have a very clearly delineated policy for what is going to be okay and what is not going to be okay, it leaves things kind of contextual and it becomes the onus of responsibility is on the worker, for example, to delineate what they are willing to put up with and not willing to put up with. These types of things create question marks, right? Instead of exclamation marks. And so folks are very tentative in the food, beverage, hospitality industry because of that lack of education and training. So we talked about the challenges. We talked about a lot of the hard things that we see in the industry. What CHOW has as a response to that is that we hope to create with the work that we do a sustainable workforce. And what that means to us, a sustainable workforce is a place where your human experience is valid, welcomed, and valuable. And when we say valid, welcomed, and valuable, that means a protected and trauma-informed right to your dignity and your personhood and your physical and mental health as it extends to all things. So we ask ourselves, okay, cool, we want a sustainable workforce. How do we get there? We focus very much on psychological safety. And so, like we said, name it to tame it. If you can see it, you can be it. What do we mean when we say psychological safety? For us, it's the absence of interpersonal fear as it applies to all of the challenges that we talked about before, right? So, what we are seeing is that with psychological safety, teams feel like they can experiment and grow, which is so important in creative fields because let's not forget that out of all of the challenging things that the food, beverage, hospitality industry is, it is also a wonderful place filled with creatives who are passionate about serving people, about being memory makers, about creating a centerpiece of remembrance for folks that come in. They are folks who are passionate about people and they're passionate about food. And so in order to safeguard that creativity through growth and experimentation, folks have to be able to contribute of themselves without being afraid of reprisal. That shows up in small ways in the kitchen, like allowing a sous chef to have access to the hierarchy, or rather to be able to look past the hierarchy in a kitchen and to be able to offer the chef a better way to get a recipe done that is both faster and more cost effective without being worried about being shamed or punished for speaking out against the boss, right? Teams can be challenging. And so, what happens when we challenge each other for growth to be able to make informed decisions all together and to make continuous improvements? So, here's what we see is that where there is psychological safety and where there are frequent check-ins, we know that we are addressing conversations, challenging conversations head on with empowering information on both sides so that everybody can enter conversations that are almost like protected spaces because on either side of the fence, we know how to interact with each other. And so we are directly addressing the idea that in the past we have been shocked or stunned or even just not knowing anything different into silence because we didn't know that there was anything different. So creating the education around consequences that and knowing that none of what you do is going to be met with a punitive approach because there's a collaborative and protected sense of conversation, we believe can lead to long-term psychological safety. And with psychological safety, folks feel like they are not going to be hesitant. They're not making reactive decisions, right? Because so much of the damage that we see coming from the things that we've evaluated thus far is reactivity, lack of education, and being contextual, right? A lot of times there are no rules, there are no boundaries, and so we don't know how to healthfully interact within those parameters. So, how do we get there? For us, we talk about it. Conversation is the centerpiece and the foundational beginning of all things. We check in with ourselves and others. That is something that we practice at CHOW internally and that we teach to teams and restaurants. We know that when we check in with others, when we check in first and foremost with ourselves, so that we can be in touch and knowing about our own personal wellness and what we bring to the table, that means we can even evaluate whether we have the capacity to have a conversation with our teams, right? Which is so, so, so important. But then when we check in consistently with others as well, what we find is that we create a culture of communication. So instead of living with this fear of, gosh, if I go tell my boss that I need 7 days off out of nowhere, what he's going to do is take me off the schedule and I'm not going to get the good shifts anymore because I'm going to look unreliable. What does it look like if perhaps my job knows when I was hired that I am a single parent that is going to need an additional week in the summer? And that does not make me any less productive or valuable, or it doesn't mean that I'm not making an investment in my job. It just means that these are considerations that have to be made in order for me to stay at my job, be great at my job, love my job. So being able to communicate frequently so that we are breaking apart the stigma of challenging conversations because we are practicing communication more often. And then this one is so important, role modeling using resources. What we often teach teams is that one of the most powerful things you can do is to try out a resource and talk to your team about it in a neutral way. And what that could look like is for me to gather my team at a pre-shift at my restaurant, and as I'm telling them about the specials, I would also say, hey, folks, I just want to let you know that I used our employee assistance program this month. Here are the things that I really liked about it. I was able to be seen by a mental health care provider and a counselor within 48 hours of putting in my application. I guess one of the challenges that I experienced that it was hard to be seen by a counselor on my schedule, but ultimately we made it work because I requested a day off ahead of time. So just a heads up for anybody trying our employee assistance program, you might want to just try it 48 hours ahead of time so that you can make sure that you have enough time to submit your schedule to your supervisor. This is how we give folks permission to try out existing resources. One of the things that we tell folks when we're having conversations inside restaurants and hotels and bars is try a CHOW resource. Tell folks about what it looked like to go to a CHOW meeting. Let them know what it looks like to access the Zoom room. Let them know that you can keep your camera on or off. These are the things that typically become a barrier to entry for seeking out support, is that we just don't know what it's going to look like. And if we can hand each other in conversation the gift of breaking apart the challenges of resources, what we hope and what we see to be true um, is that folks are less likely to stop themselves from getting help, right? We ask teams to share successes or struggles so that we can normalize the ups and downs of the food, beverage, hospitality industry and not allow them to calcify into trauma that we need to take home with us, right? If we can unpack the things that went well and the things that we want to improve and kind of perceive them as morally neutral evaluations of how a shift went, then we can all gather together and we can make better informed decisions and better equip ourselves for the next shift because we are no longer hiding or operating out of fear and shame of reprisal and punitive action. We share candidly about experiences in our community and we encourage showing up to work as our full selves. One of the things that is the most challenging, and I speak to this from personal experience about working in the food, beverage, hospitality industry, is that no matter what is going on in your life, let me reframe that, no matter what was going on in my life, when I was clocking in and I was opening up those kitchen doors, I immediately had to put a mask on my face for 10, 12, 14 hours, however long that shift lasted, and leave my personhood at the door. And I was working for the majority for some of my career in a closed kitchen. So imagine when you are a server and you are serving somebody for their 10th anniversary dinner, which is going to be an experience immortalized both in their memory and in pictures and their beautiful Instagram worthy meal. You could be a victim of intimate partner violence. You could be experiencing a divorce at home. You could have just lost custody of your child, but you are being encouraged to check all of that stuff at the door and for 8 to 10 hours dissociate completely, put on a mask that everything is okay, and then return to it when your shift is over. And so, what we want to do is create a counterculture where we are saying, even if we are showing up and we are struggling, we are productive, valuable, and valued people. In fact, I had an incredibly hard time sleeping last night. I did not wake up my most well-rested self this morning, and I am still effective at my job. I am still communicating the things that I want to communicate. I am still able to do the duties that are expected of me, but still show up as a full human being who requested 5 minutes of grace before this webinar started so I could pour myself an additional cup of coffee. And there was no reprisal or punitive action. There was just the acceptance that we are all three-dimensional human beings that sometimes require additional consideration. By doing these things, we empower ourselves with resources. We tell folks often, share resources openly. For those of you that don't know, most hospitality environments need to have a recipe binder in the kitchen and a binder that delineates all the chemicals that they clean with so that these things can be readily available to anybody coming through so that they know about allergens and they know about the chemicals that they're working with and the ingredients that they're working with, right? We want that culture of empowerment through education to extend to our resources as well. We dream of a communication board in the back of the house that has a schedule, it has your list of chemicals, it has your specials for the day, and it has a CHOW poster, and it has a sexual assault prevention poster, and it has a Mental Health America poster, and it has a Southern Smoke Foundation for financial wellness, so that everybody can have the same resources available to them. Most important, perhaps, is that we practice extending empathy to our community. We might not get things right the first go around. In fact, I'm willing to bet that there are some of you in the room that have already chatted with me in some capacity because CHOW doesn't have its own sexual assault prevention training developed. And CHOW functions as a resource broker. And what that means to us is that everybody at CHOW is able to give folks one-on-one support on top of the support that they will receive at a CHOW meeting, which I will introduce to you in just a few moments. They are also able to sit down with anybody on the CHOW staff and talk to us about the challenges that they are having that we will not have programming developed for, but we will give you a warm handover to the next place that is going to offer you resources. And that is something that we do free of cost. And so there are folks in this room that have assisted me personally when I've reached out to them and said, tell me what I can do about this. I don't know what the right answer is. Is the right answer a zero tolerance policy for this business? Should I recommend bystander training to them in lieu of the situation that is occurring in their business? What is the next right thing that I can recommend them? What is the next resource that I can give them? And that is in recognition of the fact that I am a human being, even though I stay up to date on my training. Sometimes I don't know everything that is happening. And so when we move through the world with empathy and curiosity and we tag in partners and community partners to help us, we create a better informed and better educated industry that can rely on the things that are available to them. And finally, we unequivocally recommend and we facilitate ourselves annually and work with incredible partners, some of which are in the room, who facilitate their own safe bar and bystander training that we encourage all restaurant partners to have so that we can recognize how to move healthfully in situations that are being created in the environments that we operate centered around blurred boundaries, excuse me. And that is in recognition of the fact that what we have learned and what I can tell you from personal experience just moving through the world is that a lot of harassment and assault is more likely to happen in settings with blurred boundaries and often in settings with alcohol as well. And in recognition of the fact that our late night shifts, working and living in tight quarters, uneven power dynamics between staff and management, or even staff and customers, let's be honest, are conditions that are already prevalent in the food, beverage, hospitality industry, and they can create fertile ground for misconduct that may or may not be addressed. And so for us, preventative training is one of the things that we absolutely insist on and encourage folks to follow through on. And then this right here is in consideration of the fact this is just an introduction to how we start our conversations that are our CHOW discussion groups in recognition of the fact that we know that folks often have more words to describe food than they have for their feelings. We insist on check-ins and communications that are, like I said before, consistent, frequent, neutral, so that we can assess where we're going, right? We can't get to where we're going if we don't know where we are right now. And often, a lot of what we talked about before, right? Not having a culture of self-care and the abnegation of self, checking yourself at the door. It can be incredibly powerful just to ask somebody in the food, beverage, hospitality industry how they are feeling. And so we use a scale that they already recognize, the food temperature scale, in order to use something that they already know, a soft skill that they already practice and perfected because they're food, beverage, hospitality workers. So we give them that tool and we allow them to turn it towards themselves, in recognition of the fact that we have more words for food than we have for our feelings. And so we encourage these frequent check-ins with the temperature take, and with the understanding that, and we teach this in our education, being able to use tacos, which is the protocol or the exercise that we teach folks so that we can unpack conversations without feeling like we are in control of the fix. A lot of what we hear from food, beverage, hospitality workers is, well, okay, so I'm going to check in with my team right before we're about to go out for service. And somebody is going to check in at a well done. And you'll recall that a well done means joyless, flavorless, feels like we've been on the grill for far too long. So I'm going to have a couple of folks that check in at well done. What am I going to do? Am I going to send them home? Like, we still need to get through service. We still need to get the job done 100% because we have the pressure of keeping our eyes on the bottom line and on service. But if we can separate ourselves from the fact that just because somebody checked in at a well done does not mean that I, their manager, am responsible single-handedly for fixing their mental health and for handing them the solution. But perhaps if I can frame that question from the perspective of, I'm going to hear what they're saying, I'm going to accept that it's their experience. I'm going to say it back to them so that I can fully understand where they're coming from. And then I'm going to just offer support how they requested it. Hey, I'm hearing that you're feeling really well done. How can I help you? We're about to get on the line. Can I give you a 10-minute break? Is there something that I can support you with during the shift so that we can get through it? And then on Tuesday, finding an opportunity to follow up and say, hey, on Saturday, you and I went through a really, really intense dinner service. I just want to check in with how you're feeling. How's everything going for you since then? We create and we continue to corroborate a culture of psychological safety where folks are not going to be afraid of sharing their well done. The more likely folks are to share their well done with us, the more likely they are to come to us with other challenging things that we can face together as a team, empowered with the same resources. And then before I open it to our Q&A, because I would love to hear how this information resonated with all of you and what thoughts and questions you have, this is just a very brief and very small overview of what CHOW offers. All of our services are free of cost for food, beverage, hospitality workers and adjacent. I'll be honest with you, we have folks who come to our meetings who are just allies of food, beverage, hospitality workers who want to come to a CHOW meeting so that they can learn how to be a better patron and how they can move through the world more gently, supporting food, beverage, hospitality workers. So our community and all of the things that you see in front of you are available to everybody. Keeping in mind that inclusivity and empowerment through education are absolutely important to us. And one of the things that you will not see on the screen that is incredibly important to us as well is that resource brokering, which is exactly why I am here today, why I'm so fortunate to be here today through the partnerships that we create in the community and knowing that we might not have all of the programming developed ourselves, but that I can absolutely introduce you to the next right organization and I can check in on you a week later to make sure that you got seen and that you've spoken to a real human being and that you got the support that you needed. That is exactly those partnerships and that resource brokering is exactly the kind of fruitful collaboration that makes it that I am able to speak with you today and recognize some of you in the room because in some capacity or another, I've been able to direct somebody your way to your organization or your business, or I've tagged you in to share information with me. And it is that type of collaboration that we believe is the cornerstone of the sustainable workforce, which we are hoping to build for food, beverage, hospitality workers, but that first and foremost, we practice internally at CHOW so that we are handing a system over to folks that has been tried and tested amongst our organization first and foremost. So I would love to open it up to a Q&A. Thank you so much for being patient with me. That was a lot of talking, and I would love to hear from you as well. I'm going to, if it's okay with you, take the first question or two, and I'm going to leave this up so that you have information to look for, and then in a minute, I'll stop screen sharing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. This is so important. And you can tell that a lot of people have experienced quite a bit of what you have talked to us about today. So if you'd like to come off mute or put your questions in the chat, we can address those now while we have Jasmine here as our expert. So feel free. We've got a lot of you here today. I'm going to thank you from.
I don't really have a question, but I just want to say, like, I'm so excited for you and for Chow for being like able to kind of bring this to, yeah, a bigger, larger audience. And um, I'm just really excited to continue to see this grow. And as somebody who worked in the, customer service industry for a decade,
A question.
um, and and left it because of what you described during the pandemic. Like, I I always share this with clients, with anyone that I work with or know that is in the industry. So that's all.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Um, Yeah, gosh, and thank you to everyone who ch shared in the chat. I really appreciate you sharing of your personal experiences. I believe I do the same. I share a lot of even the damaging behaviors that I was a part of pushing forward in the food, beverage, hospitality industry because I didn't know any better. It is so important that we share of the challenges in the food, beverage, hospitality industry openly so that other folks can have permission to share it as well. And so your testimony in the chat and you as well, Sarah, it is so important. Please keep doing that. In any spaces where there are conversations being had, please share your experience so that we never know what we lived through, how it can be interpreted into a roadmap for someone else's experience. So thank you. Thank you to everyone that shared. To answer Lee in the chat, is Chow currently partnering with culinary institutes or vocational programs? We aim to. It is a part of our outreach. One of the things that we are still meeting, one of the challenges that we are still running up against is that it can be really challenging to have an in. A lot of folks are not ready yet to encompass or to allow mental health to become one of the conversations that they bring into the fold into their education. We believe that it is absolutely imperative that culinary students are taught and are given the tools before they even begin their careers, because to us, What that means is what a lot of the work that we perceive ourselves as doing is like we're sitting by the river, right? And folks are drowning and we're kind of pulling them out to the best of our ability. But what we also want to do is we want to walk upstream and figure out why folks are falling into the river, right? Which is a very common recovery imagery that folks call on. And that's how CHOW feels as well. We try to work, and we do have some great partnerships with some culinary institutes and programs. Um, I would love to extend an invitation to anyone in the room. If there is a place that you think CHOW should be, please connect us. What we have learned so far is that having the introduction of somebody who has used our services or heard of our services can go a long way towards establishing our credibility and destigmatizing the idea that mental health conversations do not belong in professional or educational settings, because we believe that they absolutely do. We have a trifecta in our mission. It's mental health, wellness, and recovery from substance misuse. And those three things belong in all places where we are talking about food, beverage, hospitality work. Thank you. And then how is CHOW funded? Also a great question. We rely heavily on individual donations. We are incredibly fortunate to have a lot of restaurant partners who have actually come to us and are like, CHOW has done so much for our industry. How can we support you back? And so we have folks who will run an appetizer for an entire month and donate $1 for every appetizer sold. And we also apply to grants as well that can encompass substance misuse, mental health, or wellness, as well as peer support. Because all of the folks who moderate our meetings, they are called expos. And for those of you that don't know, expos is the term that we use for the person that facilitates the conversation between the front of the house or the back of the house. So they're the person that's holding like your ticket and telling the chef when to create your main meal, and then they're giving it to the server in the back. Well, the folks that are in our CHOW discussion groups, they're called the expos because they are trained peer supporters who are able to create a conversation that is not just venting, right? It has a transformative edge. They can stay on for additional one-on-ones. They often hold the rooms open for an hour and a half to offer additional resources. And so in order for us to keep those rooms open with folks that are trained to be able to handle those conversations, we do require a lot of funding to be able to compensate adequately for their time. Can we contact you directly about future presentation opportunities for our staff? Yes, please, absolutely. So what we typically do is we have a basic presentation in which we talk a little bit about the CHOW challenges, or rather the challenges that CHOW has identified in our food, beverage, hospitality industry. And then we add a lot of personalized talking points. We identify the best person on the team whose shared lived experience best matches the audience that we're going to go talk to, right? Because we want the people who are being able to who are able to represent CHOW to bring a lot of their personhood and their past experience to it. And then we make sure that these presentations are established in communities, as well as what we call very short and brief pre-shift conversations, which is a tiny abbreviated version of what I did today that models the temperature take and actually teaches folks how to be able to just check in on how they're feeling versus how they are doing, right? So we bring our temperature take into a business and we teach folks how to ask each other how they are. Do we work with any of the service employee unions? No, not currently, but I would love to hear more. I think one of the things that we love the most about doing presentations like this is that we get to enter rooms that we never even knew existed. And because all of our resources are completely free, and it is so imperative, I cannot stress this enough, it is so imperative to us that they remain free of cost to the user. Any type of opportunity or introduction to the next right place that is going to offer CHOW the opportunity to continue offering free resources is incredibly important to us. We actually changed our outreach tracking in the last year. And we were able to figure out that through pre-shifts, presentations, cold calling, conversations being had in the community, we were able to reach last year more than 16,000 people with free resources. And while we love that number and consider it a great success, because up until a couple of years ago, CHOW was just 3 of us sitting behind a computer performing a labor of love, we have grown exponentially since then. And we want CHOW to become a household name for folks in the food, beverage, hospitality industry because it is free. We want more folks to know about it and use it. Let's see. I have tried to leave food and beverage many times, even went to school for victim assistance, and this is the first time I heard of CHOW. It sounds like an awesome resource. I'm a floor supervisor with SAGE. I would love to share some of this information with my team. Absolutely, for sure. I'm going to share my email in the chat with you. And here's awesome recognition that I receive in almost every CHOW presentation that I do. The food beverage hospitality industry is host to so many professionals that wear so many hats. I will meet folks in the food beverage hospitality industry and then cross them again on a Zoom training because so many folks consider hospitality their side hustle or it's something that they love to do. And in recognition of the fact that so many of us wear so many hats, I love you sharing that experience. Please introduce me wherever you would like so that folks can use the resource as much as possible. And please continue, like I said, to talk about your experiences because you never know if the person that you are talking to in a professional setting is also, a catering manager on the weekend who can personally use the resource themselves. I'm going to share my email in the chat with you all. Everybody, please take note of it. Reach out to me for presentations, questions, concerns that you may not want to bring up in front of anyone, anything at all that you might have. I would love to hear from you all.
Thank you so much, Jazz, for your presentation today. Kathy unfortunately got kicked out for some reason. So I am going to take over and help us wrap up. Kathy will be emailing out all of the information. Once again, this webinar was recorded, so will be on our YouTube page here in the next 24 to 48 hours. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at CCASA or Jazz directly, and her email is in the chat. Thank you all very, very much. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, Jess.
Thank you, folks. I really appreciate it. This was absolutely lovely. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for sharing the information. Great.
Thank you.
Hey, Elaine, I think you have the co-host or host powers. I don't have any, so I don't know if you want to.
Yeah,
I
do you
think
want?
Kathy's back.
Oh, is she? Yeah, I think she is back.
I am back.
We just ended.
I hope one of you, were you able to thank everyone? And
Yeah.
Yeah.
oh my God, I just went out of the internet. This was
You want to put people out? Because you have host powers. I have none.
Let me remove everybody.
Elaine, I hope you're recording.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
she
I did
did.
record.
She did.
Stop recording.